December 1944. Europe was freezing. The Second World War had entered what many believed was its final chapter. After years of brutal fighting, Allied forces had crossed France, liberated Paris, and pushed deep toward Germany. The Nazi regime was collapsing. But Adolf Hitler had one final desperate plan. A massive counterattack through the frozen forests of Belgium. A gamble that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's goal was simple but almost impossible. Split the Allied armies in half. Capture the vital port of Antwerp. Destroy the American and British forces in Western Europe. And force the Allies into a negotiated peace. The attack would involve hundreds of thousands of German soldiers, thousands of tanks, and some of Germany's most experienced units. But standing in the way of Hitler's most powerful offensive was a place many people today have never heard of. A frozen battlefield in eastern Belgium. A high piece of ground called Elsenborn Ridge. The last gamble of the Third Reich. By late 1944, Germany was fighting a war it could no longer realistically win. The Soviet army was advancing from the east. The Americans and British were pushing from the west. German cities were being destroyed by Allied bombing. Fuel, equipment, and experienced soldiers were running out. But Hitler refused to accept defeat. He believed one final offensive could change everything. Hidden in the forests of the Ardennes, German commanders prepared their largest attack on the Western Front since the beginning of the war. The plan depended on speed. German armored forces would break through weakly defended American lines, move west through Belgium, cross the Meuse River, and continue toward Antwerp. The spearhead of this operation would be the powerful 6th SS Panzer Army under General Sepp Dietrich. Its path led directly toward the northern Ardennes. And one of its most important objectives was Elsenborn Ridge. The ridge itself was not famous. It was not a massive mountain range. It was not a symbol of military power. But strategically, it was everything. Whoever controlled Elsenborn Ridge controlled roads leading west. Roads that could allow German tanks to race toward the Allied rear. If the Germans captured it quickly, the entire northern part of the offensive could explode open. The American defenders. Holding this sector was the American 99th Infantry Division. A relatively new division. Many of its soldiers had never experienced combat on this scale. They were sometimes underestimated. German commanders expected them to break under pressure. But the men of the 99th were about to become part of one of the most important defensive battles in American military history. The division was positioned along a difficult frozen landscape. Villages, forests, open fields, and endless snow. Their job was to hold the line. Among them was the 395th Infantry Regiment, a unit that would soon face some of Germany's strongest forces. The soldiers knew something was coming. The weather was terrible. The skies were dark. Visibility was limited. The forests were silent. But behind enemy lines, German troops were moving. Thousands of men. Hundreds of vehicles. Waiting for the order. December 16, 1944, the attack begins. Time, 5:30 a.m. Before sunrise on December 16, 1944. The silence was broken. German artillery began pounding American positions. The opening bombardment of Hitler's offensive had begun. Across the Ardennes, German armies attacked. The Battle of the Bulge was underway. The first German attacks hit American positions near Elsenborn Ridge. The attackers expected confusion. They expected panic. They expected a quick victory. But the Americans were not destroyed. They held. The men of the 99th Infantry Division fought from defensive positions, using machine guns, mortars, and artillery to slow the German advance. German infantry moved through the forests. American artillery answered. The battlefield disappeared into smoke and snow. Men fought at distances so close they could see each other's faces. The temperature dropped. The wounded froze. The snow turned dark. And the first day of the battle became a test of survival. The German advance. The German plan depended on breaking through quickly. The 6th SS Panzer Army needed roads. It needed villages. It needed Elsenborn Ridge. The German commanders believed American resistance would collapse. But something unexpected happened. The American line refused to disappear. The 99th Division slowed the German advance enough to create something priceless. Time. Time for reinforcements. Time for artillery. Time for a stronger defense. In war, a few hours can decide the fate of thousands. A single road. A single hill. A single unit refusing to retreat can change history. Near Elsenborn Ridge were two small villages, Krinkelt and Rochrath. To civilians, they were ordinary Belgian villages. To soldiers, they became a battlefield. The villages sat on important routes leading toward the ridge. If German forces captured them, they could push deeper. The fighting became brutal. American and German troops battled through streets, buildings, and forests. The battle turned into close-range combat. The German attackers were not ordinary troops. Among them were elite formations from the Waffen-SS. Experienced soldiers. Heavy tanks. Powerful weapons. But every advance came at a cost. The Americans were buying time. And behind them, a defensive wall was forming. The battle for Krinkelt and Rochrath. December 17, 1944. The Ardennes offensive was moving forward. Across Belgium, German forces were pushing west. But in one small corner of the battlefield, the German advance was slowing. The reason? Two villages, Krinkelt and Rochrath. These villages were not important because of their size. They were important because of their location. Behind them stood Elsenborn Ridge, the high ground that protected the roads toward the west. The Germans understood this. American commanders understood this. And both sides knew. Whoever controlled these villages controlled the battlefield. The German attack was powerful. Heavy tanks. Armored vehicles. Experienced infantry. They expected the Americans to fall back. But the defenders of the 99th Infantry Division had transformed the frozen landscape into a fortress. Machine guns covered open areas. Artillery was prepared. Defensive positions were connected. Every road and field had become a killing zone. The men who refused to break. Many of the American soldiers defending Elsenborn Ridge were young. Some had only recently arrived in Europe. They were not considered one of the most experienced divisions. The Germans believed they would be easy to defeat. That mistake would cost them. The soldiers of the 99th Infantry Division faced a terrifying situation. They were outnumbered. They were freezing. They were under constant attack. But they had one advantage. They had prepared positions. And they had something even more important. Discipline. At Elsenborn Ridge, retreat was not an option. Behind them were critical Allied positions. If the Germans broke through here, thousands of Allied soldiers could be threatened. The future of the offensive depended on this frozen battlefield. The German Panzer attack. The Germans launched repeated attacks. Their armored forces moved forward through the snow. The roar of engines filled the forests. The Panthers and Tigers were among the most feared tanks of World War II. Their armor was strong. Their guns were powerful. But the battlefield was against them. The Ardennes was not open farmland. It was a maze of forests, narrow roads, and difficult terrain. Perfect for defense. terrible for a fast armored breakthrough. The American artillery became one of the most important weapons of the battle. Every time German forces gathered, American guns answered. Thousands of shells fell across the battlefield, breaking formations, destroying vehicles, slowing the German momentum. The artillery that saved the ridge. At Elsenborn Ridge, artillery was everywhere. American guns were positioned to support infantry almost instantly. The coordination between infantry and artillery became a major reason the Germans could not break through. German soldiers would attack. American defenders would call for artillery. Minutes later, the sky would explode. The battlefield became a nightmare. Snow, smoke, fire, and constant explosions. The German offensive was losing speed. The arrival of the American reinforcements. As the fighting continued, American commanders realized the danger. The Germans were not making a small attack. This was a massive offensive. More troops were needed. Reinforcements began moving toward the area. Among them were elements of the powerful 2nd Infantry Division. The defensive line became stronger. The Germans were expecting the Americans to collapse. Instead, the Americans were becoming harder to defeat. The cost of holding the line. Every victory has a cost. The soldiers fighting at Elsenborn Ridge paid that price. Days of combat. Freezing temperatures. Constant shelling. Men wounded. Men killed. Men exhausted beyond imagination. Many soldiers fought without sleep. Some spent nights in foxholes covered with snow. Others fought while suffering from frostbite. But they stayed. Because behind them was the road to Germany. And in front of them was an enemy trying to break through. Hitler's offensive begins to fail. The German plan required speed. Every hour mattered. Every delay gave the Allies more time to respond. And Elsenborn Ridge created exactly that delay. The German advance in the north became trapped. The powerful 6th SS Panzer Army could not achieve its objectives. The Germans had launched their final great offensive. But here, at this frozen ridge, American soldiers had stopped them. The turning point. The Battle of Elsenborn Ridge was not a single dramatic charge. It was something different. A battle of endurance. A battle where ordinary soldiers held against overwhelming pressure. A battle where defense defeated aggression. The German army still had powerful weapons. It still had experienced commanders. But it had lost something impossible to replace. Momentum. The final push. Late December 1944. The Battle of the Bulge had become one of the largest battles ever fought by American forces. Across the Ardennes, German troops were still attacking. But at Elsenborn Ridge, the situation had changed. The German offensive was no longer moving like a breakthrough. It had become a desperate struggle. German commanders knew they were running out of time. The original plan had failed. The weather was changing. Allied reinforcements were arriving. And every day the Americans held the ridge. The German chance of victory became smaller. The attacks that could not break through. German infantry advancing. American machine guns firing. Artillery exploding. The Germans launched more attacks. Again and again. They pushed toward the American positions. They attacked through forests. They attacked through snow-covered fields. They attacked with tanks and infantry. But every attack met the same result. Resistance. The American defenders had created a powerful defensive system. The terrain helped them. The artillery supported them. And most importantly, they refused to surrender. The ridge that broke the panzers. The German army that attacked the Ardennes was not the same army that had conquered Europe years earlier. In 1940, German armored forces had shocked the world with speed and coordination. But in 1944, the situation was different. Fuel was limited. Aircraft were fewer. Supplies were running out. And at Elsenborn Ridge, the terrain destroyed the advantage of the German tanks. The powerful Panthers and Tigers needed room to maneuver. But the forests and narrow roads created a battlefield where American defenders could target them before they reached their objectives. The German armored spearhead that was supposed to race toward the west was stuck. The importance of leadership. Battles are not only won by weapons. They are won by decisions. The commanders defending Elsenborn Ridge understood one critical fact. The ridge could not be abandoned. If the Germans captured this ground, they could threaten the entire Allied defensive line. American commanders organized their defenses carefully. They moved units where they were needed. They coordinated artillery. They used every advantage available. A battlefield is often decided by moments. A commander making the right choice. A soldier holding a position. An artillery crew firing at the exact moment. At Elsenborn Ridge, thousands of small decisions created a major victory. The German advance stops. By the end of December, the northern part of the German offensive had failed to achieve its main objectives. The road toward the west remained closed. The American line remained intact. The Germans had lost the chance to break through here. The Battle of Elsenborn Ridge became one of the strongest defensive victories of the entire Battle of the Bulge. The Germans had committed some of their best troops. They had launched repeated attacks. But the ridge remained in American hands. The Greater Battle of the Bulge. The Battle of Elsenborn Ridge was only one part of a much larger struggle. Across Belgium and Luxembourg, hundreds of thousands of soldiers fought. Some battles became famous. Bastogne, St. Vith, the Meuse River. But Elsenborn Ridge played a unique role. Because here, the German offensive was stopped before it could fully develop. While other areas experienced dramatic retreats, Elsenborn Ridge became a wall. A wall that refused to move. The human side of the battle. Behind every military map were human beings. Young men far from home. Soldiers who had families waiting for them. Men who experienced the fear and confusion of combat. The winter of 1944 was one of the hardest moments of World War II. The cold was brutal. The fighting was relentless. But the soldiers at Elsenborn Ridge endured. Many veterans later remembered not only the explosions, but the silence between them. The freezing nights. The exhaustion. The feeling that every moment could be their last. The aftermath. The Battle of Elsenborn Ridge ended as part of the larger Allied victory in the Battle of the Bulge. The German offensive eventually failed. By January 1945, Allied forces began pushing the Germans back. Hitler's final gamble had failed. Germany had spent enormous resources on an offensive that could not change the outcome of the war. The Allies continued their advance. And only months later, Germany would surrender. History remembers famous battles. Battles with dramatic charges. Famous commanders. Iconic moments. But sometimes, history is changed by ordinary soldiers holding ordinary ground. Elsenborn Ridge was not the largest battlefield of World War II. It was not the most famous. But it represented something important. The power of defense. The importance of preparation. And the courage of soldiers who refused to break. The ridge that stood. Present-day Elsenborn Ridge. Quiet forests. Memorials. Snow falling. Today, the forests of Belgium are peaceful. The guns are silent. The tanks are gone. The soldiers who fought there are remembered through history. But beneath the trees, a battlefield remains. A place where thousands fought. A place where an offensive designed to change the war was stopped. A place where a ridge became a symbol of resistance. In December 1944, Hitler launched his final attack. He believed one last victory could save his empire. But at Elsenborn Ridge, American soldiers proved that determination could stop even the strongest enemy. The ridge did not move. The line did not break. And the final gamble of Nazi Germany ended in failure.